Have you ever felt that despite your efforts to connect with others, you're walking a path that no one else seems to understand? What if that feeling of loneliness isn't a punishment, but a sign that you're chosen for something greater? Stay with me, because today we're exploring why divine isolation might be the key to your spiritual journey. Many of us experience seasons of isolation, where relationships seem distant, and the world feels out of reach. But what if this is part of a higher purpose? In this video, we're going to uncover the reasons why those chosen by God often walk a lonely path, and how this solitude is part of a divine preparation. From biblical examples to modern-day experiences, we'll explore why loneliness can be a powerful tool in shaping your future. By the end of this video, you'll see that what may feel like abandonment is actually a sacred process that God uses to refine you and prepare you for a greater mission. Throughout history, those called for a higher purpose often find themselves set apart. This feeling of being isolated or misunderstood isn't a punishment, but rather a necessary part of a divine process. The Bible is full of examples where God chose to separate His people from the noise of the world so that they could hear His voice more clearly. Moses spent 40 years in the desert before he could lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Elijah took refuge in a cave to hear God's gentle whisper, and Jesus himself retreated into solitude in the wilderness to prepare for his ministry. This pattern shows that isolation is often God's way of removing distractions and focusing His chosen ones on their higher purpose. In today's fast-paced world, being alone can feel uncomfortable or even like failure, but it's in these quiet moments that you are molded and refined. Whether you are experiencing relational distance or feeling out of sync with the world around you, God is creating a sacred space for growth. He uses this time to strip away the superficial layers of our lives so that we can focus solely on Him. The isolation isn't random or purposeless. It's a strategic preparation, a time when God pulls you away from others not to punish you, but to prepare you for something bigger. When you're isolated, you're more inclined to listen, to seek Him, and to discover the path He's guiding you toward. It is in these times of solitude that you can strengthen your relationship with God and understand the divine plan He has for you. This sacred isolation is about transformation, leading you to rely less on the world and more on His presence. Let's be real. Loneliness can feel overwhelming. When you're in a season of isolation, it's easy to question your worth or feel as though you're not good enough for relationships, friendships, or love. The silence can be deafening, and the distance from others can weigh heavily on your heart. But what if this struggle has a purpose beyond the immediate discomfort? It's important to recognize that the emotional and spiritual challenges you face during times of isolation are part of a larger divine process. Loneliness isn't just about the absence of people. It's about the absence of distractions. When everything else fades away, you're left alone with yourself and with God. This can be a tough place to be because it forces you to confront your inner thoughts, fears, and doubts. However, it's also in these moments that God does His deepest work. Just like a sculptor chisels away at a block of marble, God uses solitude to shape you into the person you're meant to be. Spiritually, isolation pushes you to rely on God more fully. When others aren't around to offer comfort, guidance, or validation, you turn to Him. This reliance on God, especially when it feels like you're walking through a desert, strengthens your faith in ways you never thought possible. It's in the struggle of loneliness that you build a deeper, more intimate relationship with God. Emotionally, it's natural to feel abandoned or misunderstood. But remember, isolation is not a reflection of your value or worth. It's a sign that God is working on something bigger in you. He is refining your heart, removing the unnecessary noise, and helping you to discover your true strength. In the end, the emotional and spiritual trials of loneliness are not meant to break you, but to build a foundation that will support you for the higher purpose you are being prepared for. The Bible is rich with stories of divine isolation, where some of God's greatest servants were set apart to prepare for their ultimate purpose. These moments of solitude were not moments of weakness, but rather times when God was at work, preparing them for their roles in His plan. Let's look at a few key examples: Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. Moses is one of the clearest examples of how isolation leads to preparation. After fleeing Egypt, Moses spent 40 years in the desert as a shepherd. From the outside, it might have seemed like Moses was in a season of failure, living far from the power and influence of Pharaoh's court. But during that time, God was preparing Moses for something far greater: the liberation of an entire nation. Moses' years of isolation in the desert allowed him to develop the humility and leadership skills necessary to lead the Israelites out of slavery and into freedom. His solitude was essential to his transformation from a prince of Egypt to a servant of God. Similarly, the prophet Elijah experienced a deep period of isolation. After confronting the prophets of Baal, Elijah fled into the wilderness to escape Queen Jezebel's wrath. Exhausted and afraid, Elijah took refuge in a cave, where he sought God's guidance. In his solitude, Elijah heard God not through the wind, the earthquake, or the fire, but through a gentle whisper. It was in this moment of profound isolation that Elijah received clarity and strength to continue his mission as God's prophet. His time alone wasn't a punishment, but a period of rest and renewal, preparing him to face the challenges ahead. Then we have Jesus, who is perhaps the ultimate example of divine isolation. Before beginning his ministry, Jesus spent 40 days and nights in the wilderness, fasting and praying. During this time, he was tempted by Satan, but emerged from his isolation strengthened and ready to fulfill his divine mission. Jesus' time in the wilderness was a critical part of his preparation. He faced temptations, but he relied on his Father for strength. This period of solitude sharpened his focus and fortified his spirit for the work that lay ahead. Each of these figures, Moses, Elijah, and Jesus, experienced profound isolation, but it was in their solitude that they were prepared for their greatest moments. Their time alone allowed them to hear God's voice more clearly and equipped them for the enormous tasks they were called to undertake. These biblical examples show us that isolation is not a sign of abandonment. It's a period of preparation for something far greater. The idea of divine isolation isn't just confined to biblical times. It's something many of us experience today, even if we don't immediately recognize it. In a world that's constantly connected, where we're expected to be available and engaged at all times, solitude can feel uncomfortable, even unnatural. But sometimes, it's exactly what we need. Just like Moses, Elijah, and Jesus, we too go through seasons where God separates us from others to refine and prepare us for a greater purpose. Consider moments in your own life when relationships have felt distant, or when you found yourself in a situation where you had to walk a path alone. Maybe you experienced a career setback, went through a breakup, or found yourself in a place where you didn't quite fit in. These moments can feel isolating, but they are often where the most growth happens. When you're forced to stand on your own, without the usual support systems, you discover strength and resilience you didn't know you had. In today's fast-paced culture, we're constantly bombarded by noise, social media, news, and the expectations of others. It can be hard to hear God's voice amid all that noise. This is why divine isolation is still so relevant today. When God removes distractions, He's giving you a unique opportunity to grow. In solitude, you can reflect, pray, and focus on what truly matters. You begin to rely less on the opinions and validation of others, and more on the guidance that comes from within, from your connection with God. Many people who achieve great things have gone through periods of isolation. Think of entrepreneurs, artists, and leaders who often describe their most creative or breakthrough moments as happening during times of solitude. This is because when you're alone, without the distraction of the world's expectations, you can fully immerse yourself in personal and spiritual growth. You can listen to that inner voice and pursue the purpose you were called to fulfill. Divine isolation isn't meant to disconnect you permanently from others, but to create space for you to reconnect with yourself and with God. It's a period of refinement, where distractions are stripped away so that you can emerge stronger and more focused on your path. Whether you're going through a season of isolation now or have experienced one in the past, remember that this time is not wasted. Just like the biblical figures who found clarity and purpose in their solitude, you too are being prepared for something greater. So why does God allow His chosen ones to walk such lonely paths? The truth is that this isolation serves a higher purpose. God uses solitude as a way to clear the noise from our lives, helping us to focus on what really matters. When we are surrounded by people, opinions, and distractions, it's easy to lose sight of the divine direction we're meant to follow. Isolation provides the opportunity to hear God's voice more clearly, to see His plans more vividly, and to grow in our dependence on Him. It's during these moments of isolation that God is working behind the scenes, shaping and refining us. He's removing the distractions that keep us from hearing His guidance. When you're alone, you're forced to confront your own heart, your faith, and your relationship with God. It's a time of spiritual deepening, where your trust in God is tested and strengthened. Relationships, while beautiful and fulfilling, can sometimes take our attention away from the work God is doing in us. Romantic connections, friendships, and social circles may feel distant during seasons of isolation, not because you're unworthy of love or connection, but because God wants your focus on Him. He knows that the mission ahead of you requires undivided attention, and so He sets you apart for a season to ensure that you are fully prepared. This separation is not meant to be permanent, nor is it a reflection of your worth. It is simply a divine pause, a time for you to focus on the spiritual work that needs to be done in your heart and soul. When God calls His people to walk a solitary path, it's because He is preparing them for something greater. The solitude may be uncomfortable, but it is necessary for you to become the person you are meant to be. If you're feeling isolated right now, it's important to remember that this is not a permanent state. Loneliness, though painful, is not a punishment but a part of the journey towards something greater. God is using this time to shape you, to deepen your faith, and to help you grow spiritually. It may feel overwhelming at times, but there are ways to navigate this season with purpose and peace. First, embrace this time as an opportunity to grow closer to God. Use your solitude to deepen your prayer life, meditate on Scripture, and seek God's guidance in all areas of your life. The more you focus on strengthening your relationship with Him, the more you'll begin to see your isolation as a sacred space rather than a burden. This is a unique chance to tune out the distractions of the world and to hear God's voice more clearly. Second, redefine what loneliness means for you. Instead of seeing it as a void, view it as a period of preparation. Understand that God is removing distractions and allowing you the space to become the person He's called you to be. This shift in perspective can make all the difference in how you experience isolation. Another key to overcoming the fear of loneliness is to trust that God will bring the right people into your life at the right time. This season of solitude won't last forever. God knows the relationships that are meant to align with your purpose, and in due time, He will connect you with those who are meant to walk alongside you. Finally, be kind to yourself during this time. Loneliness can bring up feelings of inadequacy, but it's essential to remind yourself that you are not alone in your journey. Many of God's greatest servants walked through seasons of isolation before stepping into their divine purpose. Trust that this time is part of your preparation and that it will lead you to a deeper understanding of who you are and what you are meant to do. Faith and patience are two essential elements in navigating seasons of isolation. When we're alone, it's easy to feel like we've been abandoned or forgotten, but it's during these times that faith becomes our greatest ally. Faith allows us to trust that God is working even when we can't see the results. It's the belief that the solitude we're experiencing is not a sign of failure, but a part of His divine plan for us. Patience is equally important. In a world that values instant results, waiting on God's timing can be one of the hardest lessons to learn. But remember, just like Moses spent years in the wilderness, and Jesus spent time in the desert, your season of isolation has a purpose. God uses this time to mold and refine you for the tasks ahead. It's through patience that we learn to surrender our timelines to God's perfect timing, trusting that He knows what is best for us. During isolation, it's easy to become restless or discouraged. You may wonder why things aren't happening as quickly as you'd like, or why you aren't seeing progress in your life. But faith teaches us that growth happens in the unseen. Just because you can't see the fruits of your labor yet doesn't mean they aren't there. God is working beneath the surface, preparing you for the next stage of your journey. Patience also teaches us to rely on God's strength rather than our own. When we're isolated, we're stripped of many of the comforts and distractions that we normally turn to. This is an opportunity to lean into God's presence and allow Him to carry us through the difficult times. It's a chance to develop a deep trust that God will provide everything we need in His perfect time. In the end, faith and patience in isolation are about trusting that God is in control. It may not make sense now, but when you look back, you'll see that this season of solitude was necessary for your growth and preparation. God is not in a hurry, and neither should you be. Trust that He is working everything together for your good. In closing, remember this: you are chosen for a purpose that is uniquely yours. Your journey may be different from others, and at times, it may feel overwhelmingly lonely. But this loneliness is not a sign of abandonment. Rather, it's a period of divine preparation. Every step you take during this time, even when it feels like no one else is walking with you, is guided by God's hand. He is molding you for something extraordinary, something that only you can accomplish. It's crucial to remind yourself that God never leaves His chosen ones alone. While earthly companionship may seem distant, God's presence is always near. He is your greatest source of comfort and strength. The challenges you face during isolation are not meant to break you. They are meant to build you up, to equip you with the resilience, faith, and clarity needed to fulfill your calling. Take comfort in knowing that you are not alone in this experience. Many of the greatest leaders, both in the Bible and in history, walked solitary paths before stepping into their purpose. Their isolation was a time of preparation, just as yours is. Embrace this season, knowing that God is using it to bring you closer to Him and to prepare you for the incredible work He has planned for you. When the time is right, God will provide the relationships and connections that align with your mission. Until then, trust in the process. Trust that your solitude is not in vain, but a necessary part of the journey to become the person God created you to be. Your path may be less traveled, but it leads to a destination that will reveal your true purpose, your divine calling. Keep the faith, hold on to patience, and know that you are never truly alone on this journey. If you've ever felt like your path is different, like your journey has been marked by moments of solitude, know that you are not alone. Share your experience in the comments below. I would love to hear how this message resonates with you. What has your season of isolation taught you? Let's support each other as we walk through these unique journeys. And if this message has inspired or encouraged you, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. Together, we can build a community that embraces divine purpose and walks boldly in faith, even in the most isolated times. God has chosen you for something extraordinary, and your journey is just beginning.